Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Muslim Vibe podcast. Ramadan Kareem to you and your family. Inshallah, Ramadan is going well for you. You're benefiting spiritually. And that's kind of what we talk about today. We're going to be talking about a spiritual diet. Things that we should do when it comes to our food and our relationship with food that can inshallah build a better and stronger connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Ramadan being a month of spirituality, but also a month of food, coming together, breaking fasts, having suhoor, iftar, all of that. And I wanted to really see, what the correlation is between these two things and how essentially we could have a spiritual diet in this Ramadan. I'm joined by Zainali Panjwani, who is an osteopath. He's a holistic health practitioner, and Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, who is an Islamic scholar and resident alim of a mosque in Leeds, UK. And they've recently been working on a book project which translates and adds commentary to the work of Ayatollah Taqi Modarresi, a very senior scholar in the Middle East, who's done this fantastic work looking at the Islamic sources, hadith and sunnah of the Holy Prophet and his family, and essentially how we can incorporate those values into our modern lives. And in one of the chapters of this book, he speaks about food and diet, and that's essentially what Zainali and Sheikh Jaffer Ladak have worked on, that specific chapter, and translated that out into a book by itself called A Pure Life. Without further ado, let's jump straight into this podcast. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum Zainali, and assalamu alaikum Sheikh Jaffer. Ramadan Kareem to you both.
Wa alaikum salam.
Ramadan Mubarak to you and to all the viewers.
We're doing this across 3 different time zones. So Zainali is in Dubai, you're in Leeds, the UK. I'm out here in California, but alhamdulillah, we managed to make the schedules align. Zainali, what time is it over there for you right now?
We are 9:20 right now.
Okay, not
PM.
too bad.
Yeah.
I'm actually recording another podcast later, and the poor guy is going to be 11 p.m. for him. Hopefully, he's not too tired. Guys, so we're in the month of Ramadan, and what's interesting about this month for me is that there's two aspects of this month. So you've got the spirituality, of course, that Ramadan brings with itself, and that we focus on. But then there's this element of food that comes about in Ramadan, right? When we're eating food for suhoor and iftar, going out, inviting people over to our houses. So it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition where you have obviously spirituality, and then you have food, which sometimes obviously we know there's benefits to food and we need it to survive and stuff, but then sometimes there's an area where it can become a bit too indulgent. And I say this as a intense meat lover and steak guy. So I wanted to know, and I've always been kind of fascinated by this, the concept of spirituality and food, and whether there is a connection. So that's if you could answer that, and if you could tell me if you think there is a connection between food and spirituality.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. All of the faith-based traditions, they have an existential link between food and spirituality. And you can actually contrast that against the way in which food seems to be consumed in our own cultures and civilizations. So if you look at it from the Islamic perspective, the Quran talks about a hierarchy of food. There is that which is halal and that which is tayyib. And what's really interesting is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, the believers, that we're supposed to be able to eat tayyib like the prophets ate tayyib. That we can eat halal, but actually there is a deeper level of spirituality in food. What's really interesting is that this sort of idea is shared across the various different faiths. There's a tradition in the Buddhist culture that when you had Buddhist monks training in their seminaries, they would choose the most spiritual person to be the chef, because they understood that the intention by which the chef was cooking, the choices that that person made whilst they were cooking would have an impact on the food that all of them were consuming. This is actually shared across all of these different traditions. Contrast that then against sort of the fast food diet, the fast food lifestyle, and I can only speak from a Western perspective, but we've reduced food to what I would arguably say is three things. Number one, the cheapest food that we can get, invariably. Number two, we want it to be delivered as quickly as possible. And number three, we want it to be tasting as good as possible. Now, of course, as food lovers, taste is important. But from the spiritual perspective, there are far more important things to us eating food. And I think what your question is aiming at is exposing the idea of what is actually sacred in food, and not just kind of the reductionist, materialist understanding of food that we've come to kind of see in our social media feeds and the way in which we've been brought up through advertising.
That's interesting because, like, one of the things that, and we say this in even in our culture, like South Asian culture, which is that, like, there's a phrase for it in Urdu, but it's like, you know, like your mother's cooking, for example, like they're cooking with love, right? And like being able to taste that you know, that love inside the food, you know, and you genuinely can tell the difference. Like you can tell the difference between like a fish burger being prepared by like a miserable, you know, worker behind a counter.
There.
and
mom waking up at like
exactly, exactly. There's so you feel that love, right? And whether, I don't know whether you call that like the barakah in the food, or how you would phrase that in like Islamic terminology, but it makes a really, really big difference, even in like kind of like choices that we make, you know, when we do go out to restaurants and stuff, right? Like you can taste the quality, like it's not even quality. Quality sounds like, you know, you're talking about like the finest ingredients. I'm talking about like, if you go to like a restaurant where the chef is actually like passionate about what they're doing, you can taste that. Like you can feel that this guy has thought about the ingredients that they're using, versus just like, hey, look, we've been given this manual of ingredients to include, and we're going to just whip it together and present it to you. You know, you can taste that difference.
Completely. As Muslims, we believe in the seen world and the unseen world. And the unseen world is surrounding us at all times with the angels and everything else. So when a person kind of discharges that love and that passion into what they're doing, that good intention, that purity moves in between the two worlds. That one we exist in, and the second one is actually encapsulating us. We forget these essentials when it comes to our faith in relation to food.
So, what would be a diet? Sorry, Zainal, you wanted to say something there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention it when you were talking about this, give a little bit of an analogy. I was trying to wrap my head around this whole concept of how can food that's made physically the same have such a possible spiritual impact. And when I was studying, I remember one person was telling me that if you use your stethoscope and you're listening to the heartbeat, you can hear the heartbeat through the stethoscope. But if you had a tool that could hear that heartbeat away from the body, and if it was really attuned and you know, fine-tuned, you could hear it maybe miles away, maybe meters away, I should say, not miles away, maybe miles away if you had the best tool. So when I think about energies and waves that pass through us, surely those energies and those waves are also passing through the atoms of the food itself. So depending potentially on your energy, your mindset, it could have a tremendous impact. And just even people who are stressed out, we know their heart beats faster. We know that their chemicals in their brain change. You know, what's happening to the food then? When you're cutting it, when you're making it, what kind of energies are going into it? Possibly. Just, I thought about that when I was trying to think about these connections between the two.
It's interesting as well, like when the pandemic started, and the uncles and aunties took to WhatsApp with their remedies. I remember my father, he messaged me and he said, you know, eat onion, all right, just straight up, just eat onion and sniff steam, okay? So I was in Asda, and I picked up an onion, and I was like, you know what? If I purchase this onion and eat it with the intention that I am obeying my father's recommendation that he sent me based on love, right, and like genuine like care, all right, surely Allah will protect me through this onion, right? Like the energy, like we're talking about, like transferring through it. Okay, like it was my own personal belief that actually we can make this happen, right? Like we're talking about this kind of like these energies moving around. Like he messaged me with love, then I purchase this onion with love, I eat it with love, and then surely the only thing that can happen from this onion is goodness, right? Alhamdulillah, 2 years into the pandemic, haven't got COVID yet.
See, bro, the reason why you didn't get pandemic is you're munching on onions, your breath stinks, no one wants to come near you.
COVID was like, mate, I'm not into this. Yeah.
He's outsmarted us all, man. He's got the cure. Prevention is better than the cure, right?
Prevention is better than cure. Spot on.
So guys, what so you've written this book, and we're going to talk about this book in a bit more detail later. What would you consider consists a spiritual diet? What makes a spiritual diet, and how can we use food to enhance our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yes, this spiritual diet, I love the word spiritual diet. Thanks for bringing that up, because it's holistic, it's wholesome. It incorporates everything around food. That's not just the food itself, right? So we think of diet, and the word diet is thrown around like nobody's business, right? You got vegan, you got paleo, you got vegetarian, you got pescatarian. I don't know what else there is out there. But the concept of diet brings a connotation of a specific strictness or a specific type, right? But when you say spiritual diet, it sort of encompasses even things like who you're around. Like we were just talking about the energies. It encompasses maybe the way you sit and eat your food. It encompasses your mindset when you get the food. Are you grateful? Are you thankful? We say Alhamdulillah. We thank God for this food that we have. It incorporates then your appreciation of where the food comes from, the source, the ingredients, how it was made, right? When you put all these ingredients together and then you get the food on your table, which brings about a kind of a sense, at least for me anyway, when I started thinking about this, it really shifted things. It brings about an appreciation of the quality that goes into the whole process of getting the food onto your plate, and how the processes that take place from picking it, sourcing it, farming it, cutting it, cooking it, and then preparing it even in a nice design on your table when you're about to eat it. And you suddenly stop at that point and you appreciate, thankfulness comes in and you say, wow, I'm really getting something that's going to nourish my body. Now, if you even move that even more forward and you start thinking about the chemical reactions that take place inside of you after you've eaten them, from the point of your mouth and chewing and the acids that get produced and the enzymes and all of the rest of it, to the point of where you get your energy, where you get your detoxification of your body, where you get your focus and mentality from these foods, you think, wow, when I'm choosing a diet now, I need to choose a diet that not only helps the source, i.e. the earth, the world, the planet, the people who farm it, all the way to helping my own body and being grateful for the body I have. Mm-hmm. And so without even talking about diet, a KFC or maybe other
let's keep KFC out of
foods.
This, okay?
We'll keep that out. A fried chicken or chips or pizza suddenly becomes, you look at it and you suddenly go, how has it been sourced? How has it been prepared? Where is it coming into my diet? And what kind of benefits is it going to give to me? And suddenly your mind shifts and you start thinking, this is probably not the best thing for me to have, right? And that's a spiritual diet. You're thinking about all the concepts around food and food production, all the way to your palate. So yeah, I love that. Those words, spiritual diet. I think it encompasses a lot, and it makes you focus on the wholeness of the food, which actually is the reality of what we should be eating in terms of food. We should be going for whole food, as close to the source as possible. The more it's processed, the more we should stay away from that.
Sheikh Jaffer, did you want to add anything to that?
So it's such a holistic answer. What we try to do in the book, it's a translation of a work by a really senior scholar in the Islamic world, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi. And so a person who spent their life committed to the Islamic tradition have insights that are with the greatest respect to someone like me, it's far beyond what I would be capable of extrapolating from our sources, the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What he does is he goes back into the Quran as an example, and he shows us that actually in the Quran there is even an order, a sequence by which we're supposed to partake in a meal. So Zainali's just talked about the source of the food, our sitting position. The Sunnah even goes as detailed as the order of the things that you're supposed to do in a meal. So he mentions, for example, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, chapter 56 of the Quran, that there's a sequence of verses where you see that the Ashabul Jannah, the people of paradise, they are actually given foods to eat. And the Quran details the order of the meal. The question of how to be able to deepen our connection with food, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is something that we try to explore in great detail, or capture in great detail in this work. And I think it's a unique effort that has come out in the Islamic tradition.
A popular question people would have with, like when it comes to food and spirituality is, are there like any recommended foods that we know in the Quran and Hadith?
So there, whenever I think about these questions, we've heard of things like honey and pomegranates in the Quran. We've heard about these common foods, these herbs and spices that are mentioned, a variety of herbs and spices, or specifics when it comes to onions and cucumbers and, the stories that are in the Quran. But are they specifically recommended? I would say potentially they're all recommended. Anything that comes as a wholesome food from the earth that has good nutrients for our body, depending on your area that you live in, right? You'll get source of different foods. So you may not have cucumbers, or you may not have good sources of honey. In different countries we have here, like I was in Dubai, I was shopping around for honey, and they've got Yemeni honey, and they've got like African honey. They've got all kinds of different forms, different sources, all have their own benefits. So I don't think necessarily that we should be thinking there are specific types of foods necessarily, but more focused on the fact that it looks like to me, and Sheikh Jaffer will be able to maybe add to this, it looks like to me that the general principles, the general overview from an Islamic tradition is to focus on whole food, plant rich it seems, and focus on source of food as well. And this is a good starting point for our bodies to stay healthy and well. And all of these other foods have benefits, and I'm sure I do see, I've talked to many people about the research that's going on with honey. I remember a friend of mine who was studying nursing actually, and he's saying that they are actually finding plasters for deep wounds where they use honey to help it to heal. We know that when you have raw honey with certain things like black pepper and turmeric, they have really improvements in your immune cells and immunity. And there are research on this, like turmeric and honey and things like that. I've got loads of research. But within the scientific field, we can keep going, right? We can keep opening up new research, and you can probably find new foods. And if the focus was on, I don't know, black pepper, or if the focus was on a spice, we may even find new things of those foods that help our body in different pathways. We're constantly opening up different worlds when it comes to this science and research. So yeah, I would say maybe there isn't necessarily a recommendation, but more of a principle approach. And maybe certain foods that I mentioned have a similarity to foods that you have in the area that you live in.
So it's really...
Sheikh Jaffer, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. So it's really interesting how we might approach this. We have so many hadith that tell us eat this at this particular time, or eat this and you have a cure for this particular illness or ailment. So for example, in one famous hadith attributed to Imam Jaffer Ladak alayhi salam, he said, had people realized what is in apples, they would not cure their ailments except by them. They are the fastest thing to benefit the heart in specific. Or, for example, another hadith, eat spring onions, for there is no morning without it being dropped from paradise itself. So immediately we have the question as to how authentic these narrations are. We also have the issue of how specific these narrations are. And then the third one, I think Zainali's really highlighted quite well, that are these ahadith only focused on these particular fruits and vegetables, or whole foods, or are they the things that are being alluded to as part of a good diet? What's really important to remember is that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ahlul Bayt alayhi wasallam are speaking about these foods, they're in a context where they are living close to the earth. They are really living a very natural life, right? The Prophet has a famous hadith where he says, no prophet has been raised, but that they have been shepherds. And in the hadith, it continues that he goes with his companions and he's picking berries. And the companions are shocked. They say, Ya Rasulullah, how do you know which ones are good berries to eat? Which ones are the recommended for this kind of ailment? And he says, no prophet has been raised, but that they've been shepherds, that we live a very natural life. The problem we have today is that even if I suggest to someone, eat an apple, as Zainali will talk about, I'm sure, the amount of pesticides that are going in there, the amount of chemicals, or how they're being picked just because they look a certain way or shaped a certain way, and as a result of that, millions of tons of apples are going wasted because they're of a slightly different shape. The whole way in which we're understanding the prophetic tradition has to be rooted in what is wholesome, what is pure, first and foremost, before we then apply it into some of the literalistic ways in which we're seeing many people advocate for it today. What we have to realize is that we're not living a very natural lifestyle today. Everything is mass-produced. Everything is produced through chemicals. Everything is being produced in a way in which it's being what's the word I want to use? It's all about advertising and maximizing profits. That immediately takes away the idea, the tayyib idea of it. It makes it halal, but you cannot any longer really say that it's tayyib. Zainali is pointing to something more fundamental, that when you look at these ahadith, go back to the idea of them being tayyib, and the Prophet's recommendations are, these are the things that were pure at that time, and try to find your own sources of food in exactly the same way, even if you don't match it like for like as per the ahadith.
Like one of the things, like when I moved to America, naturally, like coming from the UK, we're a bit nervous about like the amount of pesticides that are used here, like, hormones being injected into every animal, and antibiotics and all this kind of stuff, right? And obviously with like a young daughter as well, like you're extra mindful about what goes into them, right? Especially like from this kind of like spiritual kind of perspective as to like, what the essence of this thing is. And so California in particular, which I'm sure you know, like there's a lot of like conversation here about diet and health and like, fads and all this kind of stuff, right? They're a bit more conscious, let's say. And yeah, like one of the decisions like we had to make when we were moving here was, okay, we're gonna have to buy organic. Like, yeah, it's a premium, but like you kind of have to, you know what I mean? Like, as in, what else are you gonna do? You're not gonna have like milk that's come from a cow that's like been injected with like antibiotics and like raised just like in shackles, literally just to produce milk, right? And one of the things that like I really loved when I came here was seeing the effort that my father-in-law and mother-in-law go to getting ingredients and stuff. So everything's organic, pretty much. But even like the meat, and sometimes it's like it's a bit annoying because you're like, oh god, okay, fine, we've run out of meat, but now we have to wait for them to go to somewhere really far away to get it. But they go to a ranch, like it's a dude like has his own farm, right? His name's Sattar Bhai, like he's a bit of an OG in SoCal, like every Muslim knows him. So he's got a ranch. And like basically it's like that closeness that you have with the food, right? Like you know the guy that's running the farm. There's that trust that you have that he's raising his animals a certain way. he's slaughtering them in, like purely in line with like Islamic values and stuff. And it's organic, and you do feel that sense of like, even if it is like, like a placebo, right? Even if it is like, if someone was to weigh, measure all this stuff in a scientific lab and be like, oh look, all the nutrients are the same. It's that feeling, right? It's like that sense of like, okay, this, the effort that's been gone, even just by my in-laws going, driving 2.5 hours just to get the meat. You feel that kind of like value now, right? Like, as in, it's not like it's just around the corner and you just picked it up from Asda, although I do miss Asda and being able to do that. But like that extra effort, I think makes a big difference. And I think what you said, I think essentially the conclusion about like recommended foods is more about the process in which we acquire and consume food is perhaps more important than the item itself.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something there about like micro. We go very micro into the nutrient profile, let's say, of like what's in this product, and this product is exactly the same. But this concept of spiritual diet, which you mentioned, right? It's not even looking at the micro. It's really looking at macro. It's looking at how everything works as an integrated system, and we sit inside of that system. So it's not only about how much vitamin you're getting inside of it, or this level, but it's about how it's all produced, and that makes it what we call in literature bioavailable. It makes it more bioavailable for your body to digest and consume. So you can kind of, for example, take a supplement of vitamin or some vitamin that might not necessarily be bioavailable for you. It might just go straight through you, right? Whereas the source of food and that whole journey of going to get it, first of all, allows you to not eat meat so often as well, because you have to go and get it and source it. So you're sticking to a more plant-rich diet because you have to. But also when you go through that journey, you meet the person, you see how they're farming, you see how ethical it is, how they take care of the actual animal and hug it and give it water and really treat it nicely. You feel that it's going to impact you in some way.
Yeah.
Even if you know that when you're about to eat the food, because you're thinking about that guy. What was his name again?
Sattar Bhai.
Of course, Sattar Bhai. You're thinking of Sattar Bhai. And Sheikh Jaffer is thinking about like so many Sattars.
Podcast, man. Hasib, he would have been ideal.
Yeah, ideal candidate.
I want to do a video about his farm, because honestly, like, he's actually like a legend in SoCal, like because he's been like one of the leading like suppliers of halal meat and stuff for like a long time. So like pretty much like a lot of people know him. So I do actually want to go and do like a life in the day in the life of a farmer, because that's epic, man. Like having a ranch, like that's gold.
That's one thing I think you should definitely do, because part of it is not knowing what happens. The first time I saw factory farming, I was like, seriously, is this what's actually going on? I didn't know it. And then Sheikh Jaffer's got he was mentioning a thing in the book that we have about, the way that the chickens are put on top of each other in a truck. And when one of them dies, they just basically shimmy across and stand on them, right? That's how it's transported. And he mentions about, when I was talking to him about this, you can't stomach it anymore, right? No. You think about it, it's like, but when you go to the ranch,
you can even like, with chicken, especially with chicken, like you can actually like tell sometimes very clearly, like when this animal's not been treated well. So like a typical telltale sign is, when the chicken leg is just broken. It's just like straight up snapped. Yeah. And basically the reason why that happens is because the chicken's been like stuffed with hormones to like get really, really big and fat really, really quickly. The bone hasn't had time to even develop to like support that weight. And also the chicken's not been allowed to go anywhere. So it's like literally just standing there, like growing in a spot, basically waiting to be killed. And you see it, man. Like sometimes you get these giant leg pieces and it's like, whoa, look at that big leg piece. But like the bone's broken and you're like, God, I don't really want to eat this now, because like the background story behind it,
And actually, you can pick up on these cues. It's really interesting because when you go to any supermarket, you pick up the labeling, and you see how they have to advertise to you that there's vitamins in it, or it's good for you, or it's one of your 5, or whatever it is. Why does the industry have to advertise to you that this is good for you? Because everything else is so shockingly bad for you.
I've never thought about it from that perspective.
This is good for me. It's got a vitamin.
Yeah.
And we're completely being played here. I mean, the advertising
Mm.
is,
Yeah.
is, is supreme. That they make us think that these things are good without realizing how
Mm.
terrible everything else is. But actually, all you're doing is pointing to the whole system. Now, what's really interesting is in the Islamic traditions, there's actually a narration that says that animals, because they're conscious beings, I mean, everything glorifies God, right? يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي
Mm.
السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything in creation is glorifying Allah. Just because we don't realize how conscious they are doesn't mean that they're not conscious. And according to one narration,
Mm.
when an animal is being prepared for slaughter in a halal way, it is actually thankful to God that it actually fulfills its
Mm.
purpose of becoming
Mm.
energy for a believer, helping a believer in their worship,
Yeah.
in their education, in their participation in society. So the animal is not just halal in terms of it being dhabiha, it's tayyib in that it itself is submitting itself to being slaughtered so that it can be eaten by people and do good in it was created for a purpose. It's truly fulfilling its purpose. Imagine
Mm.
that meal going into your body and then you standing up for your salah, or you performing your psalm, or whatever it may be, you feeding your daughter. We could actually change huge parts of the world by just changing our diet, because as Zainali shows in the book, that there's a direct relationship between even things like our emotional states, how angry we get, or how we're able to control ourselves better. When we talk about controlling our anger, controlling our eyes, controlling our tongue, actually a lot of what's causing the sins is the food that we're putting into ourselves. You are what you eat, as the famous saying goes. All of this talks to a wider philosophy that we're completely missing out on in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, with having a little one, we've had some interesting conversations around like meat consumption, right?
Mm.
So she's grown up. She knows what fish is, right? And for her first kind of engagement with fish was it's yummy, all right. So a little funny story. Took her to a pond one day, and I'm like, "Oh, Mira, look, fish." And she goes, yummy. And I was like, that was not the reaction I was expecting. Um, but
Now,
even like the other day, like it kind of occurred to her because we took her to a farm, right? And she saw chickens, and she watches cartoons, and they have animals in it and stuff like that. And she was eating chicken that day as well, and so she goes to me, Baba, is this chicken alive? And I was like, okay, well, we're gonna have to have this like awkward conversation. But it wasn't that awkward actually, because when they're fresh canvas, like it's you can easily explain things to them. Um, and I told her, no, look, like the chicken was alive at one point, but then it got killed, and we took the skin off, and now we're eating it. And I said that I told her like Allah created these animals for us to consume. Okay, that's why we say thank you to Allah after we eat. Um, and you could see like she was like processing this idea, right? But I felt like it was really important. Like I know she's only like 3, and maybe I gave her a nightmare that night, but no, but like she you could see that she processed that thing. Like, okay, hold on a second. This is not just some like, don't just like eat it and not think about it kind of thing. Like it's good for her to be conscious of it. Like know where your milk is coming from. It comes from cows, and we took her to the farm, and she was milking the cow, and she understood that whole process. You know what I mean? And I think I think one of the interesting things is I remember watching a YouTube video a while back, and I think it was during like the Black Lives Matter protests, and I think he's an activist and rapper. His name is Big Mike, and he said something very very interesting. He said, if you cannot live off the land by yourself, take the word revolution out of your mouth. Like you're not prepared to have a revolution if you're not prepared to like hunt and cook your own food. Like you're not, because you're too dependent on the system around us. So you cannot survive without it. And it really, really got me thinking.
Mm.
And I know it's a slight abstraction from what we're talking about, but like it got me thinking about how prepared are we to actually be like, to go and kill an animal ourselves and eat it. A lot of people would squirm at the idea. Okay, I would like to believe that I'll be okay. But then again, like if I cut my finger, I start getting a bit faint. So I don't know, but like I think it's an important thing for everyone to consider when it comes to like food consumption. Like, are we prepared to do
I
what it
just think that
takes to get that onto our
in
table?
the Hajj process, one of the acts the rites that we have to
Yeah.
fulfill is actually the sacrifice of an animal, which represents the sacrifice that Ibrahim alayhi salam was willing to make with Ismail alayhi salam. But going to the point that you're making, even though we don't have to do it personally, there is an encouragement to do it personally, because you, unless you're cold-hearted, you go there and you just kind of, but actually what you do is you take a step back and you realize that you are part of this wider process, this economy, this food economy, and that I have to do this so that someone else down the line will benefit, because I have to give this as charity for them to be able to eat. So you're actually slaughtering it. You have to do that as part of the process, in realizing that you are no longer disconnected from nature, and nor are you disconnected from everybody else in the ummah. These are the wisdoms behind these acts, and we're supposed to bring those into our real world.
And I guess, Sheikh Jaffer, you can maybe add to this as well, but it's about being conscious, right? It's a conscious lifestyle, conscious living. And I remember when we moved to Birmingham, the first thing I told my wife was, look, we're going to try and do a vegetable patch. And it just completely failed the first time. I put all these seeds in, everything. And that process of becoming conscious, you took your daughter to milk the cow, or, in that Hajj pilgrimage, you go and watch it. Everyone's got different skill sets. Obviously, maybe we're not good at cutting an animal, but being aware of what it feels like, what it looks like, being aware of milking the cow, being aware of how much it takes for that seed to grow, how much you need to take care of it. So I wanted to try and get it right from the seed up. And just knowing that I put 20 in there, maybe one came up. Just imagine the farmer who's constantly tending to his farm. It takes effort. And when you become conscious like that, you realize you can't just go to the supermarket and grab something without realizing, whoa, where's it coming from? We have, sorry, just to add to this, we have this mindful eating practice. I think we've mentioned it in the book as well. The idea of becoming more mindful for your own mental health as well. So they have this task where you take a raisin and you smell it and you feel the raisin and the texture of the raisin. You kind of think where it came from, how it was dried, and then you put it into your mouth and you take that first bite. This whole process of mindfulness. Also, apparently, in some places in the research suggests that actually the nutrients that get released are a lot more. Your preparedness for digestion is a lot more, because you're readying everything to get ready, rather than you just grab and go. We have a grab and go kind of mentality. It's there. Let's grab it, eat it, and let's go, instead of actually paying attention. So this consciousness that you tapped into just now, even your daughter being aware of where it all came from. We've all had it, right? We've all been there, saying, "Oh, that chicken, was it alive one day?" Right? Just becoming conscious of it makes a huge difference. And she's seeing it from a farm.
Actually, add to that and talk about how you in the book how when you're not conscious of what you're eating, the effects are. So, for example, what happens when you're watching TV and you're eating? Watching your phone and eating. Can you mention that?
Yeah, sure. So this is actually a Birmingham study. So Birmingham University, they did a study on, a really good one as well, randomized control trial as well, where they put people eating and watching TV and then eating on a table or, with other people. And what they found was when you're watching TV, there is a hormone in your body, leptin, which basically gives you a signal whether you're full or whether you're still hungry. And apparently what happens is, your leptin hormone doesn't actually get released enough to tell you that you're full at least 20 minutes after you have turned off the mobile phone or the screen. Probably because your mind is working on a different frequency, or using a lot more of the frontal cortex, for example, and you're not stimulating this hormone. So you can imagine, I put the example of going to the cinema and you finish this whole bag of popcorn, and then it's only 20 minutes probably after where you go, oh man, why did I eat all of that? So the impact of kind of your emotional state and also what you're doing when you're eating can have such a big impact chemically. Leptin is one hormone, but there are other things, serotonin being released, which is our kind of happiness molecule in your brain. Right, so you can imagine, you're watching TV, you can constantly snack all the time, and they've linked that to obesity. They link that to insulin resistance as well, because your sugar levels are going up and down, diabetes, lots of things, just because of the environment that you choose.
Doesn't know you're full, when you're full, basically. Is that right? Your own body.
Yeah, your own body
It's
doesn't give you the
crazy.
signal. And actually now we've actually come up with there's more information now that you don't only get insulin resistance, you also get what we call leptin resistance, which is exactly that hormone I was talking to you about. So you don't actually get the chemical signals to tell you that your body is full or not. And the example we give is you're in the car and you see your fuel gauge or your fuel meter, you go to the petrol station, you filled up a full tank and you're still showing 0. And you're thinking, well, your body doesn't even know that it's on. You've actually got a full tank, and your body doesn't even know that. So you just keep
That's
filling it,
crazy.
And then
right? And
That's
obviously,
actually really, really crazy,
contrast
because
that to the
there's so many.
Prophet, where he says, eat 1/3, drink 1/3, and leave 1/3 for space. Whereas what we're doing is we're getting a massive meal and we're just watching a TV show whilst eating it, and we don't know we're full, and that's why we keep eating and eating.
and it begs the question. We talked about the fact that advertising and nutrient density, all this other stuff that we talked about. It begs the question that is it the person's fault that they can't actually signal their body that they're full, right? Years and years of being fed a certain food, a certain diet, a certain lifestyle, you get switched off essentially. And now to turn that back around needs a whole shift, at first a conscious shift, and then slowly making that change. So it's not their fault sometimes when we tell people that you're overweight and you have to calm down on your eating habits. They're actually not getting the signal, right? And if they're not getting the signal, that has to shift first, right? So it's really interesting, especially when we do like coaching and health coaching. We have to think about these things.
What struck me is that there's a lot of parents, and hands up, we do it too. Like during mealtime for children, you kind of whack on the cartoons, right? The intention, of course, is to keep them focused in one place so that they finish their meal, right? With the intention is to kind of make sure that they're getting enough food inside their system. I'll be real. I've never been a big fan of it myself. It's not my department, and for me. But the fact that you're saying that it doesn't allow one to regulate essentially how much they're consuming or not consuming, or perhaps even like it makes you're losing consciousness of the whole process of eating food, right? We just discussed like the kind of root of like a spiritual diet really is about the consciousness of the whole process, from where the foods come to the point of like actually eating it, and even like afterwards saying thank you to Allah. If you're lost in that moment just because it's like a situation of let's get these nutrients in and get going, then well, during that mealtime there's no consciousness, and that could be a big problem. That's something really, really insightful. I didn't know that. I'll be interested to kind of learn more about that research actually. Brings me to my next point actually. Between like these like Islamic recommended acts of eating and stuff like that, and science, is there any more like interesting correlations that you found during your research?
Sheikh Jaffer, there's you might know it by heart, that hadith from Imam al-Qadim that we have put in the book as well, the diet one. Do you know it fully?
So he says that the fountainhead of all diet control is how much you eat. The fountainhead of all good health is the diet control of how much you eat. So
if we
just basically that the more you fill your stomach. See, we're used to having, you go to a restaurant, they give you a 5-course meal, and you value how much you value the restaurant on. You sitting there going, "Oof, man, I couldn't do any more." And then he brings over the dessert menu. You know what I mean? So the way we've been taught, in the West, to value our food, our meal is, "Oof, couldn't do anything more." But then you still find an extra compartment. The hadith from Imam al-Qadim alayhi salam says that the fountainhead of good health is actually in the control of the portions that you eat. I think that's the hadith that Zainali is referring to.
Yes, and also the mention of stomach, the mention of gut, and disease starting within the gut and within the stomach,
Yeah.
these kind of concepts. And so you asked this question of the correlations. There is 2021, there was this paper by Dr. Fasano, who's like a big guy when it comes to gut health and leaky gut, and this idea of the fact that you can get a leaky gut and things can go through it, and you start creating disease and illness. And the title of the paper is actually called "All Diseases Start in the brackets leaky gut," right? And it's a really simple paper, by the way. So anyone who's, if you read scientific papers, sometimes it's boring, right? This one is actually just little snippets of different conditions that we suffer from: autoimmune conditions, diabetes, all these different heart conditions. And it shows how the gut is the start point for a lot of these illnesses. So even within some of the ahadith that we had referenced, and also this one in particular as well, talked about stomach. I think there are some more which talk about things like starts in the gut. There's a big parallel between those two, right? We're talking spiritual Islamic tradition and now the common day science, and we look at the gut microbiome and the leaky gut, and we're thinking about the gut health as the source of disease, or the start of disease. And actually, to put into perspective, it makes a lot of sense logically as well. There's two entrance points for anything to enter our body: mouth, what we eat, and our nose, what we breathe. Yeah, there's the two entrance points into our body. Everything else is kind of covered through skin and everything else. So whatever we take in, breathing-wise, which is another topic altogether, and eating-wise, is the start of many of our diseases that we have. And I saw that correlation between some of the ahadith and also what we see within, or what we talk to clients and patients about. So it's really interesting. Even, I think I mentioned it in the book as well, the Tibb al-A'imma, this compilation that they say is ahadith, maybe authentic, maybe not authentic, I'm not sure, that talk about specific remedies. And the idea is, the principal idea is that food has such a big impact. And we have this term nowadays, this food is medicine, and literally medicine. And you can use it as a source of medicine as well. Ultimately, the pharmaceutical drugs that we have also come from sources of food. They've just been processed a little bit to create the thing that we want. But ultimately, they come from food sources.
And it's so interesting when it comes to like food and stuff. There's so many things out there, like from different cultures, right? Like for example, haldi, turmeric, or turmeric, however it's pronounced. That's something that, like, our peoples have been using, South Asian peoples have been using in their food for a very, very long time, right? Been putting on their skin and God knows what. And it's like, it seems like only in the last like 10 years, white people would make you believe that they've just discovered it just now. And that's like a revolutionary cure for everything. But there's so many interesting things, right? Like, as in, I've recently been taking this supplement. I don't know if you know, it's called ashwagandha. And so I've been a bit stressed out. It's been a bit busy time. And so my father-in-law recommended me taking ashwagandha. And I'm astounded by like the effect it's had on me. Like I'm like, whoa, what that, like, it's actually like a miracle, because I was like getting really, really stressed out. And this thing, like, it calms you down. It's like a thing for like, anxiety and stress relief. And it just made me think there's so many things out there that probably exist in like cultures around the world that we just don't know. But like the South Asian diet particularly is a bit of a problem, right? Because I remember I was in a majlis once, and I don't know if you know who Sayyid Zainali Panjwani is.
Yeah.
But he Jack, he's on a bit of a spiritual flex, right? And he basically just called out like South Asian cuisine, like Desi cuisine, because he was like, look, like other cuisines around the world, they have been built upon millennia of nutritional value, right, and eating off the land and stuff. Whereas like South Asian cuisine, because of the Mughal Empire and their fascination with food and just taste, right? They just wanted things to like taste really good. They just sent people out and said, "Hey, listen, man, just try coming up with some dishes." That was their contribution to the world, right? So you've had kings and empires in the past where it's like, "Hey, go forth and research the sun and astrology," The Mughals were like, hey, listen, see what you can do. Can you make a biryani, right? And lo and behold, a biryani was made. And the rest is history, so to speak. But basically, there was no concept, or there was no deliberation of like, hey, let's try and find stuff that's going to be nutritional value. It was more like, hey, what's going to make the king happy with his meal? And then those, that's basically what we eat now. And there are elements of healthy vegetables in our in our cuisine, but they're fried. Like, to get what I mean, it's like fried the hell out of it. The nutrients are all gone by the end of it. Just thought that was an interesting little
You're really
tidbit.
right. There are locations around the world which have perfected their diets. I read one called the Osaka Diet. I don't know if you've come across this. I think it was the article that I read suggested that the highest or the longest living average population in the world was a specific group of people from this Osaka area in Japan, one of the islands in Japan, and it was because it was a very fish-based diet, a very
Mm,
natural-based diet, and that's why they are the longest living people by average in the world. There's a lot we can learn from these different people.
So
mm.
these places are called blue zones, right?
Yeah,
Where
I've
people
seen that
live
TED talk.
for the they're called blue zones, and actually there's an interesting part to that it's not only like we're going with this spiritual diet, this holistic approach, not only the food but their lifestyle and their social life. It was just something really interesting research which was done on one of these blue zones, I believe, and what happened was that they found that in a certain year there wasn't many heart attacks or heart problems above the age of, I think it's 55, I can't get the details complete, but 55, 60. They came back about 10 years later and they found one or two popping up, three or four. They went 10 years after and they saw it was below 55. People were getting heart conditions. And they saw that nothing had really changed in terms of diet, in terms of exercise, etc. But now people had become socially distant from each other,
Mm,
and
mm,
they weren't
mm,
spending
mm,
time anymore because they were obviously trying to maybe get money and housing and all the rest of it. And that seemed to be the only correlation, because this was a longitudinal study, something that was done over a long time. They
mm.
found that that was probably the only correlation between them. So it's quite interesting. And they also talk about the fact that these blue zones, the one common theme that everyone can make sure they're 100% certain about, is they are very, very plant-based,
Mm.
plant-rich in terms of diet. Yes, they
And
eat
beans
fish.
and
Yes, they
stuff,
eat
right?
meat,
Legumes and
beans,
beans.
legumes. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Lots of rainbow colors, lots of different types of vegetables as well.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. The social
Mm.
aspect of food is what stands out to me. It
Mm.
matters to me a lot, right? Like, I'm a big foodie, um, but like a big part of like the food experience for me is the social aspect of it, and I think it's so powerful. It's such a lovely thing to sit down as a family and eating dinner together, and
Yeah.
even when you go out with friends and you're in a restaurant, it's such a beautiful, unique thing. And I remember
Yeah.
one particular year, when I was living in South London by myself, and I had to like eat on my own, right? And I was like, oh God, this is so depressing. This is like, I wasn't even bothered to eat. There was nights where I was just like, oh, I'm not gonna eat. Like, I can't. What do you want me to do? Like, sit here in my one bedroom studio, like, I mean, like next to my bed, and then go to sleep. Like, that's just nasty. Like, I didn't want to do it. Um, and then I would go to the restaurant and eat in the restaurant, just so that there's people around me, man. And it kind of reminded me, like, years later, I learned there's a hadith from, not hadith, sorry, there's a story of how Nabi Ibrahim would, walk miles just to break bread with someone else because he didn't want to kind of eat by himself. Um, I feel like, Ramadan really is like uh, it's a blend of these things, right? Like when we think about Ramadan, we think about the social aspect, we think about the food and the tasty foods and the good foods, right? The the barakah rich foods, and of course the spirituality. So all these things almost seems like it goes hand in hand, and I guess that's what we call, those, that nice Ramadan vibe.
Mm.
Um, I wanna get into a bit more detail about the book, and the origin of this book, and what kind of sparked your involvement in it, because you mentioned that the book itself was, I believe, written in Arabic by Ayatollah Madarisi, Ayatollah Taqi Madarisi. How did it kind of evolve into your project?
So, Ayatollah Madarisi is a well-known jurist and commentator of the Quran, and he had tried to evolve fiqh in kind of an incremental way. And what he tried to do was expand the chapters of fiqh into those that people don't necessarily think about. Normally, when we think about fiqh, we think about, tahara or hajj or saum and things. He decided that he wanted to write a book which dealt with higher aspects of living, ways of living at a higher level. So he wrote this work called Hayatun Tayyiba, Pure Life. And in it, it looked at new chapters of fiqh. So, for example, the fiqh of healthcare systems. What does the Quran and Ahadith say about how a healthcare system should be created? He looked at other chapters, for example, how should the courts system be set up in an Islamic system? So one of the chapters was on food and diet, lifestyle around food and diet. So when I was studying this book, this particular chapter of food and diet stood out to me, as I felt that it wasn't being spoken about, covered enough in the Islamic context. In the mainstream Muslim world, there is a brilliant scholar, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and I listened to him quite a lot, and he's really inspirational. He's very topical on the issue of food and diet. And I was listening to him, and I was really impressed by his knowledge. So as I was reading this book by Ayatollah Madarisi, I had the intention to be able to translate it, this one chapter, so that we can bring it to the English-speaking world. And Zainali, being a good friend, we would often meet, we would talk. He had a podcast of his own, and we did a short podcast. And what we realized is how much the Islamic traditions are actually mirrored with contemporary science. And then I invited Zainali onto the project. So I translated the work from Arabic. I've commented on his work, Ayatollah Madarisi's work, with a little bit of my own knowledge. And then Zainali's also contributed from a very, very spiritual, scientific aspect as well.
Yeah, it was really exciting as well, because it gave me a chance to see some of his work and then try to match the two if possible, or at least make the themes match to some degree. And it was really interesting. As I was learning some of the hadith and the Quranic verses, things were just popping up, thinking, whoa, I know this. We just got taught this. I just studied this, right? It was really cool. So it was a great journey for me as well, just going through the commentary side as I was learning how vast that journey of food is. And that's why I'm talking about it from a very holistic and broad macro perspective, because he does the same thing, touches upon the different sections of food, the source, the food itself, who you sit with, the order of food in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. All of this stuff is all mentioned. So it was powerful. I really enjoyed and honored to try and put some comments on as best as I could.
One of the things that I'm getting a sense of from speaking with both of you today is that this book has, and the work that you've done whilst obviously putting this book together, it's given you, it seems like a very balanced perspective on the concept of food. Like you didn't kind of just come up here and start saying, hey, you need to become vegan or cut out milk or go gluten free and these kind of things. It was a very it's a very Islamic recommendations that you guys have kind of spoken about, which is about just that consciousness, right? And it's just essentially that's the underlying theme for everything, right? God consciousness in everything essentially is what will bring us closer to Allah. And food being such an integral part of our daily lives and daily routines, it's advantageous for us to use this as a way to remember and thank Allah and get closer to Him. So thank you so much for the stuff that you've mentioned today. I wanted to know, for the listeners, if there's any particular advice that you would give for iftars and suhoors, whether it's from a nutritional perspective, whether it's from a spiritual nutritional perspective. What would you recommend our listeners this year for Ramadan when it comes to food time?
I can add to this potentially. So the things we've all talked about is really good, because we can talk about the tips of sitting with one another, right? And the positions you sit in, okay? There are some benefits of sitting on the floor. And of course, there are also benefits sitting on the chair as well. The position you sit in is quite important. And also the time that you take to look at your food and pay attention and be conscious of it is very important. Some potential nutritional tips, and I like that you mentioned that we stayed on a very broader aspect, not giving specific fads or diets, because ultimately everyone's lifestyles are different and they come from different places, and that's really important. So these are just generalized nutritional tips, but definitely don't forget to have your suhoor or your morning meal before you start your fast. Getting up in that time and having it, especially having a bit more of a protein type heavy approach, is going to be valuable for you to have a good energy throughout the day. You don't really want to be flat out. It's quite important, that meal, and I'm sure there potentially are hadith that talk about having that meal and paying attention to that meal. So that's one. The second is, of course, hydration. It's not only about food, right? It's also about water and the water intake that you have. So whenever you get the chance, prior to the meal, or at least giving yourself some time. You may have heard that you have to give yourself some time before you drink water. If you want the kind of scientific understanding, it's because you create this acid in your stomach. You don't really want to neutralize it too quickly. Allow yourself to digest. So giving yourself a little bit of time window. We seem to be, especially in the South Asian community, is chai, right? It's this tea all the time. And that's a diuretic. It's actually dehydrating in your body. So hydration is a really important tip. And of course, then, if you become conscious of the food that we're eating, yes, taste is great, and it's important to also have good taste. But we seem to concentrate. I remember this yoga teacher telling me, you concentrate on the 8 centimeters here, and we forget the 16 centimeters over here, right? So when we become conscious, you will start to shift, and you feel better shifting your food, having more fruit and vegetable when you break your iftar, when you break your fast. Taking some pause between food as you're eating your iftar. We tend to just dive in, right? Just give yourself a moment. I think in some cultures what they do is they start with a very small, maybe a fruit or something really small, and they give themselves about half an hour window. And I remember trying that. It's really powerful. It makes you feel good. Maybe we are supposed to just have one khajur, a date, and some water, and give yourself a little bit of time before you actually have your full meal. It doesn't have to be an hour, but half an hour, 20 minutes might be a good thing to do. So those three, I think we can start with general principles. Ultimately, we know what to eat, right? Vegetables and fruits. Yeah, we know what to eat. The hardest part is cooking them or understanding how to make recipes from them, right? And if you've always made a recipe of a certain kind, it's very difficult to then shift. So maybe this is my last tip. I'll add one more. Why not throw some vegetables inside the meals that you already know how to cook? You're making a dal, a lentil soup or a lentil thing. Just throw in a bit of spinach, some potato or some peppers. Just add them in to meals you already know, and that makes things a lot easier, right? Yeah, and plan your meals, and you might be able to get a lot more of good stuff in your food.
I would like to recommend one thing, if I may. The month of Ramadan is about appreciating. One of the things about Shahr Ramadan is about appreciating the hunger of others, and especially at the moment we're going through a cost of living crisis. We don't realize just how many people are having to choose between food and heat, or foods that are nutritious and foods that are cheap. Yeah, so I think we really need to focus on not wasting food. And I'll conclude by quoting one hadith from the book, which I just think is phenomenal. And it goes to everything that we've been talking about being conscious of food and conscious of others as well when you're eating. The hadith says, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is narrated to have seen a discarded fruit in his house because it wasn't really so ripe. And he actually became angry. He asked the people of the house, he said, "What's this?" He said, "If you're full up and you don't need to eat any more, if you don't want to eat this, then know that there are plenty of people who are not full. They're not satiated. Feed it to whoever needs it." So the Imam was so particular about ensuring that there was no food wastage in his house that he even reprimanded people in his house and encouraged them to make sure that it reached people who were in need. I think we all know how much we buy, especially in Shahr Ramadan, thinking that we're going to need it all, and we see how much is actually going to waste. I would humbly like to recommend a real consciousness around food wastage this month, inshallah.
That's a big one. That's a really big
It's a
one.
big one.
That's a really, really big one because, boy, in Ramadan, like obviously, you've got this sense of like wanting to showcase food to your guests, like you don't want to have like a half empty table and stuff, right? Which is understandable. But astaghfirullah, man, sometimes
He's
like
the
it's
buffalo
even more in Ramadan than usual times.
I fried earlier. He is the buffalo that I deep
Yeah.
fried, kind of thing, showing off.
There's a camel I prepared earlier. No, for sure. Like it's yeah. No, it's sad because especially in Ramadan, like it actually increases. Like the food waste potentially increases, and that's a bit of a problem. So I really do thank you for actually bringing that up. Um, in terms of the book, how can people go about purchasing this book? Where can they find out more information?
So
All of that jazz.
here is the book that's actually available, inshallah. So it's available in various different bookshops across the continents. So if you're living in UK, Europe, you can go to House of Taha. House of Taha stock this book. It's available for order now. If you live in Australia, Shia Books of Australia. If you live in India, it's called JPC, Jafari Propagation Center. And if you are in North America, it's IPH, Islamic Publishing House. So all of these different bookshops have copies available.
We'll leave a link for all of those below.
Will be
If you can just WhatsApp me the links for
sure.
all of these, and then inshallah we can include that in the description. Guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I feel like we could honestly do a part 2 on this. Zainali's kind of piqued my interest about the seating positions of eating, and he just kind of left it like so. I'm a bit teased. So maybe you can write an article for us on the Muslim Vibe, inshallah, and speak about that, because that's an interesting debate. Like team floor or team chair. I grew up on the floor, but now, now we're sitting on dining tables, and I want to know more about that for sure. Thank you guys so much. I wish you a wonderful Ramadan this year. I hope, inshallah, that your hajats come true, that your rightful hajats come true. I pray that you and your families all benefit spiritually from this month, and please keep me in your prayers. And inshallah, we'll be in touch soon. And I can't wait to receive a copy of this book as well.
Sure, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
That was our conversation with Zainali Panjwani and Sheikh Jaffer Ladak. I must admit, as a foodie, I found that conversation truly fascinating, seeing how we can be conscious or being conscious of all the decisions that we make, from sourcing the food to cooking it to eating it, and then what we do afterwards, how all of that collectively can help us attain closeness to Allah. And of course, in Ramadan, that's like, a primary objective. I mean, it should be even beyond Ramadan, but particularly in Ramadan, it's like on the front of our minds, which is a blessing. And so having that conversation has really kind of inspired me to think about the little decisions that we have to think about when it comes to our food. And inshallah, I hope you found that really, really beneficial. If you did, please leave a comment below. Let me know your feedback. Leave 5 stars on this podcast, a like button if you're watching on YouTube, much appreciated. And that's it from me today, guys. I hope you have a wonderful Ramadan, and we'll catch you on the next podcast. Barakallah feek. See you next week.